Okay, so we start the new Masechta. You with me? Kate said,
Yes.
okay. So it starts like this. Kate said, how do witnesses become Zayman witnesses? So Zayman are witnesses where another group of witnesses say that not that their story isn't true. We don't know about their story. It may be true. The main thing is that it's impossible for you to be a witness to this because you are somewhere else. You can't be in two places at the same time. So how do witnesses become Zayman? So the Mishnah gives two cases. Testify, there's two witnesses are saying we testify that so and so is the son of a grusha, a divorced woman, or the son of a chalutza. Chalutza means that her husband had passed away, and which made her a widow. And then she was supposed to marry her brother-in-law, but the brother-in-law rejected. So she becomes now a chalutza, which is a type of divorcee. Or whatever the case is, she's forbidden to marry a Kohen. So both of these women are forbidden to marry a Kohen. And now the witnesses are testifying that this child, this person, is a son of a Kohen that was married to a Grusha or a Chalutza. Okay. And then we find out that it was impossible for these people to know that. I guess they were testifying, like Rashi says, that we were there when the mother was divorced. So we can testify that this woman we were at the divorce, and therefore this child is a ben grusha. So we don't say, it's interesting because it says it in a singular. We don't say that these witnesses become a ben grusha or a ben chalutza in place of what they wanted to do. We do not say that. Ella like Arbon, we say rather that there's just Malkus. In other words, there's no we don't disrupt the lineage of the two witnesses. We just give them Malkus. We just give them lashes. Okay. Normally by Edim Simon you do what they wanted to do. And over here we're not going to do what they wanted to do. We're not going to apply that to them. Rather, we're going to just give them Malkus. Yeah. Okay. Case number 2. Testify about this person that he is deserving to go into exile, which means that he killed unintentionally. And then it turns out that it's not true. Well, not that it's not true. That these two witnesses were not there when this happened, so they cannot testify that. So we don't say that this person that these witnesses go to exile because that's what they wanted to do. Ella like Arbam, rather we say that they get Malchus. We have two cases where the Edom Zayman doesn't work out exactly as the original case. Rather, it's like the two exceptions. Gemara asks, Kate said, "Ein Edom Nasim Zayman mi violate." This the phrase of the introduction of the Mishnah of Kate said Edom Nasim Zayman. How do witnesses become Zayman? It should be exactly the opposite. It should say, how is it that they don't become Zayman? Because you just told me two cases where you don't do what you wanted to do to them, rather you give them malchus, you give them lashes. So the phrase should have been, Kate said, Ein ha'edim nasim Zayin means not. How do they not become Zayman? That's what it should have said. But then also, Midatani Lakaman, we have a Mishnah further on. It says, Avalamr lahem, heich atamidim. The second set of witnesses says to the first set of witnesses, how could you testify about what happened? Everybody say, yeah, I'm not complaining. You with us somewhere else. That's the case of Zayman. Michlal de'elo ein Zayman. In the case that you're telling me here is a case that's not like that. Okay. In other words, if I have a Mishnah later on explaining what are Zayman, so then this Mishnah is obviously saying something else, saying the exception. So why does the phrase of the Mishnah, why does the introductory phrase not match what the answer is? Gemara says, Tana Hasam Kai. We're going back to Masechta Sanhedrin. Now, what we're doing here is we're ignoring the last chapter of Sanhedrin. Saying that the last chapter of Sanhedrin, Chelek, is not really part of the Sanhedrin narrative. The Sanhedrin was the Masechta Sanhedrin was all about what types of punishments people get from the four punishments of the four capital punishments: Skila, Sreifa, Herek, Panic. So in one of the at the end, the last Mishnah says over there, whenever we do Eidim Zayman, whenever we have Eidim Zayman, we always give them the punishment that what they wanted to do, except for Chutz Mizayim Baskayin Ubayla, except for false witnesses that testify about a Baskayin and the paramour. We say we don't give the Eidim Zayman the death penalty of the girl of the Baskayin. Ella Lamisa Cheres, we give the death penalty of the man. Misa Cheres. We don't give the girl. The difference over there is that the girl gets straight up. She gets burnt, and the man gets chenek. He gets strangulation. We don't give the witnesses what they wanted to do to the girl. We give to the witnesses what they wanted to do to the boy. Okay, so after having said that in the last Mishnah of Sanhedrin, before the last chapter, then now we say where we don't do not only the punishment of the man, but we don't do a punishment that's similar to anything. Right? We just give a totally separate punishment. Okay. How is this? I like we don't make the two witnesses into a ben grusha ben chalutza. Rather, we just give the punishment of malchus. Where do we get this from? Where we switch over from what they were intended to do to have a different punishment of malchus. Amr Rabbi Shua ben Levi, Amr Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish. It's a little strange. Shua ben Levi may have been a little older than Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish. Right. It's a strange, yeah.
I have it in parentheses, and then it has a note that it says, like in other texts it has it without parentheses.
So which words are in parentheses?
In the name of Rav Shimon ben Lakish.
Oh, so that's in parentheses that you have in parentheses?
Yes.
Okay. So Rabbi Shua ben Levi says, you do to him what he wanted to do. Now it says, so what we're saying now is that if we would disrupt their lineage, and we would say that these people are not kosher to serve in the temple because we're now going to consider them a ben grusha ben chalutza, then it won't just be for the witnesses themselves. This is going to be for all generations, all future generations. And since the verse says that we do to him what he wanted to do to his friend, so then we only want to do something that's going to only be for him, not for his future generations. So the punishment of Eidim Zayman cannot extend any more than that one generation of witnesses. So that's why we can't do this. So the Gemara asks, so let's just do that. let's just punish this one person or these two witnesses that they won't be able to serve in the temple. They'll become halalim, but it won't continue. The Gemara answers, "Din kashazamam lasis beleka," but then we won't be doing the real kashazama because the real kashazama, what they wanted to do, is for all generations. We can't do for all generations because we only can do to the person himself. So we're stuck, and so therefore we're going to give another punishment, and that's going to be Malkus. You would like this. There's the bottom. There's a Taisvus here that asks that let's say it's a third generation Mitzri. Let's say they're testifying that this person is a second generation Mitzri. So it doesn't extend to the third generation. So that theoretically you can come up with a case where they testify that this person is a second generation Mitzri, and they'll say, okay, now let's make this person a second generation Mitzri, and it won't continue to be the third generation because it's fine. So Taisus like discovered a case where you won't have this Gemara's answer. And it would come out like a very strange thing where we're making a person into a Mitzri because of, anyway, Taisus says that just like we say, Vasisem loy kashazamam, you have to do to him and not to his descendants. We're going to say the same thing we do to him and not to his wife. Since his wife would be prohibited to him, so that would affect the wife. So that's why it won't apply in that case as well. In other words, what Taisus did was he found a case where the Gemara's answer wouldn't apply, and then he answered it with saying that even though the Gemara's direct answer doesn't apply, but we can extend the Gemara's answer, Vasisem loy, and we'll extend it to loy ishtai, not to his wife. Anyway, okay. Bar Pada says, this is where it starts to get a drop complex. He says, Maha Mechalena Miskalo. Just 1 second. There's a Kalvachimer here. If the father of this child that they're testifying about, that the mother was a Gerusha or a Chalutza, but the father himself, yeah, not the child that they're testifying of, the father, he does not become prohibited to serve in the temple just because he lived with a divorcee. It only affects his children. So if the one that was causing the whole problem himself is not affected, so when it comes to witnesses that they're trying to affect, but in the end it doesn't happen. Why? Because it become Edom Zayman. In a din hal, for sure they shouldn't become halalim. So if the one himself that actually caused it doesn't become a halal, so people that are trying to cause it for sure shouldn't become halal. So we have a kal v'chaimer. Kal v'chaimer is the person himself that's causing it doesn't get affected, so people that are trying for sure shouldn't get affected. Gemara says, Maskepla Ravina. Ravina has a question on this. If you're going to use the concept of Edom Zaymim to discuss, to determine, if you're going to use the concept of a kal v'chaimer to determine the outcome of Edom Zaymin and Kim Batalta Teres Edom Zaymin, we have to ignore kal v'chaimer when it comes to the laws of Edom Zaymin. It's going to spell it out. He says you're going to disrupt the entire concept of Edom Zaymin. It says, Ma Seikalina Niskal, if you're going to use a kal v'chaimer, so Rashi learns this Gemara a little different than Taisvus, and he says that he introduces another law that the only way Edom Zaymin work is if they intended to cause something. But if it was more than intended, if the law was actually carried out and the person was actually punished, then we don't punish the Edom Zaymin the same way. In other words, if the second set of witnesses that comes in and says, how could you say what you're saying, you were with us at that time, and you can't, how could you say that you were there at a certain time? No, you were with us at that time. So they have to step in and say that before the Bezdin carries out the law of what they wanted to do, before they before they were testifying that so and so, let's say, killed. Okay, so if the person was already killed, then we don't kill the witnesses. It's only if they intended to kill, not but didn't kill. The Gemara says like this: if the witnesses killed, ended up killing the person, that's what we're talking about. The cycle. If they intended to have someone stoned, and they actually the person was actually stoned, so then the witnesses don't get stoned. So habolisko, if they're intending to, but it doesn't actually happen, for sure they shouldn't be stoned. If the whole concept of Eidim Zayim is we do to them what they wanted to do to the other person. So if they did it to the other person, then we should for sure do it. So if you're going to use Kal V'chaimer, then it's going to mess up the whole concept of Eidim Zayim. Because Eidim Zayim, it's inherently contradicts the concept of Kal V'chaimer. That's where Rashi learns this command. Taisus has a little different learning commentary on this. He says if they testify that someone stoned his friend and killed him, so we don't stone the witnesses. We give them chenek because that's the death penalty for someone that is it chenek or the sword? We give the sword. They get death by the sword. Sayah, right? Herod. That's the death penalty for murder. So if someone testified that someone stoned his friend, we don't give him the stoning, we give him the sword. So someone that's intending to have someone stoned for sure should not get stoned. If we testify that he actually stoned him, we don't do the stoning. We give him the hereg, that which is the punishment that he would be deserving. So if someone actually stoned his friend, we'd give him the sword. So these witnesses that are coming to testify that someone is chayiv skila, but he ends up not getting the skila because we find out in the interim we find out that they didn't zayman. So for sure we should not stone them. Okay, and basically the concept of kal v'chaimer would mess up the concept of Eidim Zaymin. So we don't disrupt the Eidim Zaymin because of a kal v'chaimer. Al machvarta kedushin mikara, rather the first interpretation would be the correct one, or machvarta means more white, more correct. That's the one that we said from Rabbi Shua ben Levi, which says we can only do to him, but we can't do to the descendants. Okay, so that's why we don't do. That's why we're going to do Malkus instead of making him a Ben Grush Ben Chalutza. Okay, the next case of the Mishnah was Midim and Bishpain Shulchayiv Galas. Two witnesses testified that so and so is Chayiv Galas, that he killed someone unintentionally and therefore needs to go into exile in the cities of refuge. And then we find out that these two witnesses could not have witnessed the event because they were with another two witnesses somewhere else in a different city. So how do we know that we give Malkus instead of sending him to exile? Rish Lakish, here we have Rish Lakish. Maybe that's why there was confusion in the last command. Rish Lakish says, Damakra says, Hu Yanas Alacha Saharim. He, the one that killed it unintentionally, has to run to one of the cities of refuge. Hu V'lei Zaymimin. Him, but not Zaymimin. So we have a exclusion that it can only be the one that killed unintentionally. It can't be other people. So the exclusion of him excludes the Zaymin. Rabbi Yochanan says Kal V'chaimer. Can use a Kal V'chaimer. You see, this is not working well. We see introduce a Kal V'chaimer, it's going to mess things up. It says Amahu Shasa Ma'aseh B'Mezid. If the person did it intentionally, he doesn't go to exile. And for sure they shouldn't go to exile. If someone that kills intentionally doesn't get exiled, So these people, um, Edom Zimmerman, that want a person to go to exile, but they didn't. What did they do? They just said a story that this person killed. But their story was intentional. So it works like this. Let's see this again. Rabbi Yochanan Aimer, Kal v'chaimer, Mahu sh'asa ma'aseh b'mezid. If the person actually killed intentionally, Ein Goyla doesn't go to exile because exile is only for someone that kills unintentionally. Hain, so these two witnesses that are testifying, they didn't do an action, but nevertheless, it was b'mezid, it was done intentionally. Their non-action was intentionally. For sure, they shouldn't go into exile. Let's see if that's how Rashi meant it. Yeah, that's how Rashi meant it. B'mezid they do, but they testified intentionally. Obviously, they testified intentionally. For sure, they shouldn't go to exile. When the person does it intentionally, he doesn't go to exile. So when they testify, even without an action, but they're testifying intentionally, for sure they shouldn't go to exile. That's what Rabbi Yochanan's explanation for why there's no exile to the witnesses. Okay, now it says a question on Rabbi Yochanan's Kal v'chaimer. Yeah, we don't like Kal v'chaimers in this. It says v'hiani senes. No, it should be exactly the opposite. Kushas b'mezid. When he does the action b'mezid legally, he did an action and he did it b'mezid. He doesn't go to exile because that won't be an atonement for him. We don't want him to get the atonement because his sin was too great. He did an intentional murder. However, but they didn't do an action. They just testified with their mouth. The Mezid, maybe they should be able to go to exile. So they should be able to get an atonement because their sin is not as great as the person that actually did the murder. It wasn't a direct murder. Ella, the Gemara says, we're going to go back to the way Rish Lakish interpreted that said that we're going to learn from the word who. He goes to exile, but no one else goes to exile. So in other words, we're going to drop, in both of these cases, we drop the second interpretation because there's a problem with it, either because we can't accept Kal v'chaimers, or because we have a logic that says that maybe the whole thing doesn't apply because it's only to discussing atonement. And this person his sin was too severe to get the atonement. Okay, now it says Amar Ula. Ula says, "Remez leidem zayim min atar minayin." Give me an allusion, a source, a hint where it talks about Eidem Zayim in the Torah. Remez leidem zayim. You're asking for a hint. Baksiv. You don't need a hint. It's a clear pasuk. It says vasisim lekashu zamam. Says you do to him what he wanted to do. It's written out clearly. Once a hint where it says that he gets malchus. In other words, we need a hint for these other cases, which are not the direct punishment that they wanted to do. This is another punishment. Minayin. So what's the source for this? It's tikwas at tzaddik v'shiyos Russia. Russia. How do they translate that? It says if they will vindicate the what's the translation? They will make innocent.
Exonerate.
Exonerate. They will exonerate the righteous or the innocent, and they will make guilty the wicked. How do they translate Vahiyim bin Russia?
And convict the guilty one.
And right after that it says
After that, it says, then it will be that if the guilty one is liable to lashes.
Okay. Then if the big so we're learning like this. The pasuk says, exonerate the innocent, make guilty the guilty one, and then if he's liable to lashes, if the guilty one is liable to lashes, he'll get lashes.
That's exactly what they quoted.
Okay.
Um,
So the Gemara asks like this: Yishum v'tzdiku es tzaddik, because they exonerated the innocent. V'ershiu es rasha, and they made guilty the one um, that's guilty, the wicked. So therefore, we're going to give lashes to the one that's deserving lashes. What does that have to do with that? We give lashes because he's deserving lashes. It doesn't have to do with making guilty and making innocent. Ella Adim Shershiu Tzaddik. Rather, we're going to interpret the pasuk like this: if there's witnesses that come along and they they make guilty the one that's really innocent. Okay, that's not mentioned in the pasuk. The next part is mentioned in the pasuk. And two witnesses come and they vindicate, they exonerate the one that was really righteous. As we're talking about the second set of witnesses that testify about the first set, that you were with us. So how could you say that that person was really guilty? Because you weren't even there. So v'tzdikus tzaddik, the first part of this pasuk is talking about the second set of witnesses is putting the person back into a status of being innocent. Shavino lahani rishayim, and that made this first set of witnesses into wicked. Then vayim bin rasha. Then we give lashes to one that's deserving lashes. The Gemara asks, why do you need this pasuk, this complicated interpretation in a pasuk? If we have a pasuk that says that you should not be a false witness, which is a negative prohibition, and every negative prohibition gets lashes. Why do we need this complicated pasuk? My answer is Mishum Davi Lavshem B'Maisa. Lavshem B'Maisa, like oh, for that we have a simple answer. We couldn't use that pasuk to tell me that you get lashes because lashes only goes to a sin, a negative prohibition that has an action. But this wasn't an action. This was just a verbal prohibition, a verbal violation. Now, there's a discussion here if actually the lashes is learned from Leisana, but the pasuk of Itzdikus Tzaddik tells me that I could learn it from Leisana, or if I'm not using Leisana at all, there's always different ways of interpreting things. Rabbanan, thought in a brisa. There's four halachas that are said about Eidim Zayman. One is Ein Naseh ben Grusha ben Chalitza. One is that they don't become their lineage doesn't get ruined because they testified about someone else's lineage. Yeah, that's number one that we learned in our Mishnah. The second one is that they don't go to exile, cities of refuge. They testified someone kills on the 10th day. And they don't pay the kaifer, which is if an ox scored 3 times, right, and it ran away and it killed the person, right? So then it's a sharamuat. If it killed 3 times, and then it's the fourth time, the fourth time, it would have to pay kaifer. The owner would have to pay the victim's family. Would have to pay kaifer. Now, if witnesses testify that this person's ox killed, they don't pay the kaifer. It's only the original person that pays the kaifer, not the witnesses that falsely testify about someone else that he owes kaifer. And what's the last case? If they testify that someone stole and he doesn't have the money to pay back, so that person would have to be sold as a slave. So we don't do the same to the witnesses and sell them as a slave. All right. So, Mishum Rabbi Akiva, name Rabbi Akiva, they said, Ein Mashalman al Piatzman, that they don't pay on their own. Which means that if they run to Besdin and say that we falsely testified about someone, and they admit to their own false testimony, so they don't end up paying what they wanted to do, because this is a rule of knas. Knas, if you admit to being guilty of a fine, you're exempt from paying the fine. Okay. The Gemara goes back to explain each of these cases. They don't become the son of a divorcee or the son of a chalutza just because they testified about someone else. Like we said before, that we can't punish the descendants. We can only do to him what he wanted, but not to the descendants. That's what we explained from Rabbi Shua ben Levi. And they also don't go to the cities of refuge, Kidamar, as we learned in the pasuk. It says, "Hu Yanas," that only he goes. This was from Rish Lakish, right? Only he goes to the city of refuge, and not the witnesses. Now the next two cases. He doesn't pay that fine that's put on someone whose ox kills a man. The witnesses don't have to pay that. It's only the original person. Kasavri, they hold kufa kapara, that payment, which is called kaifer, is an atonement payment. And these people are not b'nei kapara. They're not deserving of this atonement. Let's see how that says spelled out here. Yeah, simply their ox didn't kill, so they're not. It sounds like an interesting reason, because so what, we do what they wanted to do. Okay, let's take a look what the Gemara is going to say. Mantana kufar kapara. Who holds that this is considered an atonement, the payment? There's different ways of looking at this. One way of looking at it is, look, the person died, so you have to pay what his value was to the family. It's not an atonement payment. It's rectifying the loss to the family. Other one is, sorry?
Rabbi, was this the one that was a machlekes of whether was whose worth was it?
Yeah, exactly. That's gonna play out in a moment. Umar's gonna mention that in a moment. So, but there was one way of looking at it, that we say that it's paying back the family for the value of the loss. Other way of looking at it is not that the family needs the money because they lost the money. This is just an atonement that we put on the perpetrator. It's the main thing is that we get him to pay, not that the family should receive the money. The main thing is that we put an atonement on him, that he should pay. Okay, so the Gemara says, "Mantana kufa kapara." Who's the one that says that it's an atonement? Rav Chisda Rabbi Shmuel b'nei Shel Rabbi Yechon ben Braki. It's Rabbi Shmuel, the son of Rabbi Yechon ben Braki. The Tanya, son of Rabbi, so nothing pity nafshik. Pays the atonement of his soul. What's the atonement of the soul? The main nizek, the value of the victim. Rabbi Shmuel b'nei Shel Rabbi Yechon ben Braki, the main mazik, not the value of the victim, the value of the perpetrator, which means the owner of the ox. My and probably this is the machlekes. The Marsav Kufar Mamayna. One of them holds that the kaifer money is what's it called when it's the
Ransom?
no, it's when they pay back money that was taken. It's a
Restitution?
yeah, restitution. Restitution. Do you say it's a restitution? Or Marsa, one of them says that it's restitution. It's paying back what the person was worth, and it's money. Marsa Kapara, the other one says that it's an atonement.
The art scroll has it translated as compensatory.
Compensatory. Okay. The other one says that it's an atonement. Amar Papa. Papa says, "Lie. You don't have to say that. Just because one says Dmei Nizik, one says Dmei Mazik, the value of the perpetrator, the value of the victim, that doesn't mean that this is the machlekes. Really, it could be, Rav Papa says, everyone holds kafir kapar, everyone holds, both of those opinions hold that it's an atonement. And the machlekes is, when we do an atonement, what do we pay? It doesn't mean automatically that one is compensation and the other one doesn't have to be that. It could be that both of them are an atonement. And the question is, what type of atonement does he pay? In my tamay the rabbanon. What's the reason for the rabbanon? 1 second. Yeah. So what's the reason for the rabbanon that say that you have to pay the value of the nizik of the victim? If it's an atonement, then he should probably pay his own value. So it says nemar hashasa l'mayla. You have brackets over there. It switches it from lamata to l'mayla. Which is it says nemar. It says the word hashasa. Hashasa means to evaluate. It says evaluation above when a pregnant woman was hit and she has a miscarriage. They have to pay the husband of the woman. And it also says by kaifer. This is all in Parshas Mishpatim. It says by kaifer, the payment of the ox that kills. It says also the word hashasa. Ma lahalan b'denizik. Just like by the woman, you pay the value of the fetus. Afkan b'denizik. Also here, you pay the value of the victim. Okay, that's the opinion of the Tanakama. Rabbi Shmuel, he's the one that says you pay the value of the perpetrator. It says it says that he gives the atonement of his soul. Well, whose soul? It means the perpetrator's soul. Rabbanan say that you pay the value of the victim. What about the What about the atonement of the soul, the redemption of the soul? It says in you're right. It does say atonement of the soul. But how do we evaluate that? We evaluate that based on the way he pays the atonement of the soul is by paying the value of the victim. And that we learn from Yashis, from the evaluation. Okay, one of the things that we mentioned was the Einim Karn Be'avad Ivri. The Eidim Zayman are not sold into slavery to pay for a theft. Now, they didn't steal, but they're testifying that someone else stole. And that person doesn't have money, and that person would be sold into slavery in order to compensate for what he stole. So we should say that the same thing should apply to Eidim Zayman, and we don't say that. Rav Amnun understood this, that when do we say that they don't get sold into slavery? We're talking about where the person that they're testifying about has money and he's able to pay it back. Right? He never really stole, but they're testifying that he stole. And now we're finding out that but that person actually has money. So we're not going to put the witnesses into exile. We're not sending the witnesses into exile to pay for what they testifying about this other person, because the other person actually has money and he would be able to, they would not become Eidim Zayman and he would actually have to pay it. He has the money to pay it. So why should the witnesses now go into exile? The Migu de Iolein is Davin, if the original person wouldn't be sold into slavery, even though they don't have money to pay for what they wanted to do, but the original person that's sold, he does have money. But let's say they're testifying about a poor person that's stole, and he doesn't have money to pay back. And what would be the outcome of that? They would have to go into slavery, be sold into slavery. Even though these witnesses do have money to pay it, but they wanted this person to end up being sold into slavery, then mizdavnu, they would be sold into slavery. So, according to Rav Hamnuna, there would be cases where the witnesses would be sold into slavery. It's only in a case where the original person has money where it's not sold into, where they're not sold into slavery.
So, Rabbi, so according to him, is like the secondary also like plays into effect?
The secondary doesn't play into effect, which means that it's only if the original person doesn't have, if it's only if the original person has money where they won't be sold into slavery. But if the original person does not have money, then we're going to sell the witnesses into slavery.
Yeah, so like whether he has money or not plays effect. So it's like the opposite of the Bas Cohen, because in the Bas Cohen, like they doesn't depend on the outcome of the person that they witnessed against.
Uh-huh. By the Bas Kohen, they're testifying about the Bas Kohen, and they don't end up getting that punishment. They get a different punishment. They get the chenek, right? But here they're testifying that someone stole and he doesn't have money to pay back. But they're going to get what according to Rav Hamnuna, they would get sold into slavery.
They get the same.
They get the same.
And then in the Bas Cohen, like, they would get also strafe, no?
No, they get chenek by the Bas Kohen.
Okay.
They get what the man. Okay, so now there's a question over here. This is a Amalei Rava. But whatever the case is, what we can say to him, if you did have money, would you have been sold into slavery? We also shouldn't be sold into slavery. So in other words, we're at the Kashan Rav Hamnuna, that if they would have money, if the original person that they're testing about would have money, he wouldn't be sold into slavery. Well, we have money, so we shouldn't be sold into slavery. But because of this, Ella Sav Rav Hamnuna Lameima, rather, what Rav Hamnuna was saying is that if either of them have money, then they're not sold into slavery. Aye. But if my kids are running on the side.
Okay. Oh, sorry, Rabbi. Now I get my mind going. I was wondering, this amount that they're talking about, is it the double payment or the original payment stolen? Like, if they don't have enough,
Original payment.
the original. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, as far as I know, it's the original. Because could be even Gzela. There's only a double payment by Gneva. By thievery. This could be robbery.
Hmm.
Right. Well, in other words, Rav Hamnuna would only say that they're going to go into exile. That would be if there was if neither the thief or the witnesses have have money. But if one of them did have money, then they wouldn't go into state. Okay. Okay, so now Amalei Rava says that it's not correct what you're saying. It says Vinimkar Bignei Basei. It says he is sold into slavery because of his own theft. Amar Achmana the Eibishter said. So Bignei Basei v'leibes mame. It's only the original person that stole, not the Edom Zayman. Okay, so we learned from a pasuk that it doesn't apply. Okay, now the last case was Rabbi Akiva.
When he didn't have to pay for it because he admitted.
Yeah, let's leave Rabbi Akiva. for tomorrow. All right.
Perfect.
Okay.
Same time tomorrow?
Yeah, that's a Hashem.
Right.
Unless what time am I burning the chametz yet? It should be fine. We'll try. All right.
Here is like around okay, so I'll do it earlier. Yeah, because here's like around 10. I think the burning here is like around um
No,
oh, it's 12. Yeah, no, it's fine.
it's fine.
I
Okay.
don't have much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Have a good day.